welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. As always, I am delighted to be with you for another Tuesday episode, another author interview. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as I always do, that if you are a fan of this podcast, please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either watching it or listening to it on. That way you will always know when there are new episodes, and it really does help us to support not only this podcast, but the network as a whole. If you would like to do that in a slightly different way, you can go to the link that is showing up next to me, gsmcpodcast.info, and leave a tip or a donation. While you're there, if you would like to also leave a question or a comment, you can do that, and I will be happy to engage with said question and or comment. I'll bring those up on the beginning of the next episode after I receive them. So again, if you want to support the network and this podcast in another way, in addition to all the ways that you always support, which is greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated, that link is gsmcpodcast.info. So how is your week going? It is hot here. It has finally gotten hot, and I realized why. I mean, lots of, I'm not a meteorologist. It's not going to be that kind of a conversation, but there is a medieval festival in a town about a 15-minute drive from us. Every year in August, there's a medieval festival. And the coolest thing about this is that it is in an actual castle, like an 800-year-old castle. You can go to this medieval festival. That, to me, is just the coolest thing ever. Now, we have not yet been. This is our third August here, and we have not yet been to this medieval festival. Why? Because it always ends up being the absolute hottest weekend of August, or the hottest weekend of the summer. I mean, first of all, August is going to be hot anyway, and then they schedule this medieval festival where, in a place where there's not a lot of shade, this castle is hot even on days that it's not hot. And I'm not disparaging the festival or anything. It's just, I hope people drink lots and lots and lots of water while they're there. But every summer, it has been the hottest weekend of August and possibly the entire summer. I realized yesterday that's why this weekend was so hot, because it was the medieval festival. That's my random story for you for the day. We did not go to the medieval festival. We did spend a lot of time in the pool this weekend, as did many of our neighbors. We have several apartments in apartments, condos, whatever you want to call them, in our complex that are Airbnb. So they often have people visiting from other countries. And this week, the pool was absolutely full, and it was full of us, we're American, our neighbors who also live here full-time, who are South African, and then every other person in the pool was from the UK. So that was fun. We got to meet a whole bunch of families who are here on holiday, and they had kids in the pool, and of course we were all just trying to beat the heat and spend as much time in the pool as possible. So that was a lot of fun. We always enjoy meeting new people, and one family is the daughter of our neighbor, and we've met her, but we had not met her daughter and grandchildren yet, so that was a good connection. She owns the place next to us, and so she's back and forth, and then this was the first time we had met her daughter and son-in-law and 2 grandchildren. So good weekend, just very hot. I am still hot. I think you could probably tell by what my hair is doing. Let's not talk about what my hair is doing, but it's hot. Did I mention that it's hot? Let's instead of talking about the weather, let's talk about this week's author interview, because it was a lot of fun. This week I am speaking with author Libby Cudmore about her book, Negative Girl. Let me give you the description of that book. Martin Wade lived hard in his youth, but unlike many of his former bandmates and roadie friends, he didn't die young. Instead, he hit the recovery path, cleaned up his life, and became a private investigator in a dying city in upstate New York. When his heavily tattooed and scarred assistant Valerie sets up an appointment with a young man who needs help keeping her biological father away from her, none of the 3 realize that the father is Martin's old bandmate, still using and on a destructive path that will soon be headed straight for Martin's clean life. As Martin struggles, Valerie becomes increasingly obsessed with their new client's life. So that is the description of Negative Girl, which both tells you a lot and doesn't tell you much, right? It does. This is crime fiction. It is mystery. It's labeled, I think when I was sent the email, it was pitched to me as suspense or possibly thriller. And there are levels or elements of suspense and thriller in this book. But for me, it is low on both the eek and the ick factor. Still haven't made that graphic. No idea what it would look like. Send me your suggestions. But the eek factor, which is the like really scary, it's going to keep you up and you're never going to sleep again. It's low on that. It is intense, it is fast moving, it is fast paced, but low on the eek factor. Also low on the ick factor. Not a lot of gore, not a lot of things happen, but we do not have to have them in full living technicolor, however that works, however you describe the ick. So low on both of those, but very good, very fast paced. It's a fun read. Deals with a lot of heavy subjects. They're former addict. Martin is in recovery, has been for 19 years. His former bandmate comes back into town, not currently in recovery. So that puts Martin's sobriety in question. He has to struggle with a lot of issues. Valerie is a very complex character. She is running from her past, trying to figure out what happened to her previously before she moved back to her hometown. This is her hometown. There are scars, both physical and psychological, from that past that she is not dealing with very well when we meet her in this book. So there are also short stories where maybe some of you have already been introduced to Valerie and Martin, or the Wade and Jack's PI series, as it is called, because they have been in several publications, including Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine. I could have gotten that title wrong. I apologize. But Libby does mention all three of the publications that the short stories have been in prior to this. So like I said, maybe you are already familiar with these characters and this story, but this was an introduction for me, and I am looking forward to Valerie and Martin's stories as they continue, because they're an interesting dynamic. Different generations, both have a huge love of music, both have issues in their past that they are trying to deal with to various levels of efficacy, and just a really good character-driven, intense, fast-moving plot. With that, let's go ahead and turn to the interview with Libby. Again, the book is called Negative Girl, and the author is Libby Cudmore. Hi, Libby, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you here, and I'm excited to talk about your book, Negative Girl. Before we get to the book, though, yay, yes, there it is. Before we get to that, if you would take just a few minutes to share a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you.
All right. I am a crime writer, mystery writer, podcaster, retro fashion rockabilly extraordinaire. I am native to Oklahoma City, live in upstate New York now. Former journalist, worked at video stores, temp agencies, all that sort of fun hipster millennial lifestyle.
Love it. Love it. I could ask a million follow-up questions. But I will just say, is that the red lipstick that you generally wear? I mean, like, it's a good red lipstick. I can never find red lipstick. So talk to me about your red lipstick.
All right, it's a Besame Mary's Red. It's my favorite lipstick. I wear it pretty often. I actually just picked it up and fell in love with it. So okay. Shout out to Betty's Bombshells in Asbury Park. Okay. It's my favorite. I go there all the time. That's my like vintage shopping destination. But
love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, can't find a red lipstick that I like, so I like it on other people.
Yeah, it's a really good one because it's a red and a pink, so it doesn't look kind of costumey, which when I have a Beetlejuice red from what is it, X Revolution, that I wear, but I have to be wearing like something red with it because otherwise it looks like clown paint.
You don't want that. No. Um, all right. Well, I'll ask you makeup tips later. Let's talk about the book.
That's the only one I have.
Okay, well, we've covered it then. As I said, the book is called Negative Girl. Can you give an overview of the story?
So, this is the first novel from my Wade and Jax series that appeared in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine, and Tough. It follows Martin Wade, who's a former punk turned PI, and his assistant Valerie, who's a little bit of a hipster. And when Martin's old bandmate's daughter shows up with a case for him, he's sort of drawn back into his old life. And so it's following the death of this girl and who did it. So it's a mystery, but it's also an exploration of these characters. So it's beyond a traditional mystery. It's sort of, I don't want to say elevates the genre because I hate that expression, but it's a little more Raymond Chandler, a little more literary than a strictly a whodunit.
Yeah,
it's much more of a noir.
I think it gets described as suspense/thriller, but I think crime fiction, mystery, and definitely character driven is a better description, because there is there are some tense moments, but I always say there's the eek factor and the ick factor, and it's low on both. Like there's not anything that's making me go, ooh, the ick factor and the eek factor, like it didn't keep me up at night. So it's like a good fast-paced read, but not either of those things.
I have a very low tolerance for the ick factor. I actually just last night saw Alien Romulus and spent a good half the movie like hiding behind, just like peeking out, like, oh, facehugger. Oh no, more facehuggers. So I do have a very low tolerance for the ick factor.
Yeah. My husband likes to watch things and I just leave the room.
Yeah.
I can sense something coming and I just leave the room. So.
Yeah, when I travel, my husband sort of loads up our Tubi with horror movies that he wants to watch that I will not watch. And so it's very funny because, I'll be logged into Tubi and I'll be seeing what he watches and he'll see what I've got on my Tubi. And it's just sort of like, oh, I see you were watching Mystery Science Theater 3000 again. So
I get it. So don't hate on our comfort watching choices, right? If Libby wants to watch Mystery Theater Science, I can talk, Mystery Theater 3000 for the 3000th time, then she is absolutely welcome to do so. There are things that I like to watch or read over and over and over again, and that's just what makes me happy sometimes. But my husband thankfully doesn't watch a lot of horror, but he does watch a lot of things that are high on the ick factor for me. So he just finished watching something, and that's when I can always tell something's going to happen, and I just leave the room. He's actually watched a couple of series recently that were pretty high on the ick factor, and I just left the room. But anyway, we're going to take our first break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking more, of course, about Negative Girl and how the Wade and Jack's PI series relates to those short stories that I mentioned earlier. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. As we get into segment 2, I just want to take a quick second to remind you once again that you can go to gsmcpodcast.info to leave a tip or a donation if you would like to support this podcast and the entire network in a monetary fashion. It is greatly appreciated. It is not required, of course. All of your support is appreciated no matter what form that support comes in. But if you do want to support the podcast in that way, in a monetary fashion, go to gsmcpodcast.info. And welcome back to segment 2. Before the break, Libby was talking about, we talked about lipstick, which never can find a good red lipstick. As you can see, you've never seen me in red lipstick on this podcast. Not the point, but we were talking about the brief introduction of Libby, which was fun, and then got into the book, and then we were talking about avoiding things that our husbands watch. That's not exactly what we were talking about, but that'll wrap it up a little bit for you. So let's go ahead and get back into the interview with Libby. You mentioned the Wade and Jack's series that you were writing for Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine. So is this feels a little bit maybe like a prequel then, because it does say that they aren't Wade and Jack's at the beginning. So that develops. Can you talk about the relationship between the series and the novel?
So the first story appears in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, and it's called All Shook Down. This appears sort of at the tail end of the story. So if you've been reading the stories all along, this fits in at the end of them, and you see the relationship. The first, I think, 4 or 5 stories are just Martin. Valerie makes her first appearance in the May-June 2023 issue, and then she's in from there on out. She starts as a journalist, and actually she's discovered Martin's old life and wants to talk to him about it. He's reluctant, because it's not part of his life that he's super proud of. He was using a lot of drugs at the time. His fiance had gone missing, and he was accused in her disappearance, so he's really left all that behind. And then she comes and is asking him a bunch of questions, but then gets kind of caught up in the case and decides to, instead of exposing him, decides to join with him.
Yeah.
So, and then she has her own case that's told from her POV in the July-August issue of Alfred Hitchcock Mystery Magazine.
Okay.
That's Alibi and Ice.
Okay. And that helps, because when I was reading it, I kept thinking, is there a book that I'm missing? I felt like there was backstory that has, and so when I looked on Amazon, no other book with them. And then I went to your website and realized, oh, okay, so there's a serial. So that makes sense. Let's talk a little bit more about Martin and Valerie. What about each of them do you think will resonate with readers?
Well, it's funny because with my first book, The Big Rewind, I found that a lot of readers, a lot of Gen X male readers, really, really loved that book. And so Martin is in some ways kind of a response to that. He's a character for that audience, because, he's got all this music that he loves. He's very dry and kind of stoic, but not cold in a way. And I think, there's a certain Gen X masculinity that I think people will be attracted to, because it's not toxic. He's not warm and fuzzy, but there's something really, you kind of want to take care of him in some ways. So I think, readers will be drawn to that. He feels like someone that someone that you might, that's, a friend that's kind of grown up now. And he's got a little bit of a tragic backstory, as we said. So I think people will be really drawn to that. And then Valerie she's such a kind of weird hipster. She's so tough, but there's a real vulnerability to her. And so I think people will really engage with that. And then their relationship, the two of them are really ride or die, and it's not a romantic relationship, but they're in for each other, and they would do anything for each other, and they fight, it's not all hugs and, being best friends and skipping through the woods. I mean, they disagree a lot. And so there's some tension there. And I feel like ultimately their relationship is incredibly real, and they feel like real people. Which I think is really fun.
I agree. And that's one thing I really appreciate about them was that they are friends and they've got this relationship, but it's not romantic. And
Mhm.
there are times when you can see how close they are, and you think as a reader, wait, are we going that direction? And then they do not. So, it's refreshing to not always have the main characters be in that will we, won't we, will we, won't we.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think their age difference, like that was really important to me. Like
yeah,
there's a whole generation between them, but
absolutely.
they're able to find this common ground and
Yeah,
just really, love each other and care about each other. But yeah, without that romantic entanglement.
right. More found family than anything.
Yeah. And especially
So
because Valerie's an orphan, she's raised
yeah,
by her aunt. It's just her and her brother and her aunt. And so finding family is really important to her.
absolutely. Were there any challenges to writing from dual points of view? Because there's chapters from Martin's point of view and chapters from Valerie's points of view, and you switch back and forth.
I there I think the hard part was there were chapters that I wanted to tell from each point of view, but that just didn't make sense to tell them. So in earlier drafts, it got really hard. Like, okay, what is Martin doing at this point? I wish he was telling this story, but it doesn't make sense because he's in this location. Like keeping the locations and where they are and what information they have, that was a little challenging. I definitely had to kind of rejigger some things.
Yeah.
And it was tough because the original, like earliest drafts, which I started back in 2017, were all Valerie. And I had sort of always joked that I wanted to write like Effie Perrine PI. And so I started writing from Valerie's point of view entirely, and the book wasn't going anywhere, and the book wasn't going anywhere, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I wrote All Shook Down, the first Martin Wade story, as kind of an exercise. And I thought, you know what, I really like writing for him. And so that's when it all kicked in that I could write from these alternating points of view.
Yeah, makes sense. In terms of your characters, did you have really good pictures of Martin and Valerie before you started writing? Have they developed throughout the writing process? Because it has been a process with the stories and the novels. So how much have they developed throughout, and how much did you know about them before you started?
Martin kind of came pretty quickly. Original early drafts had him as a jazz pianist, but then I read the book Trouble Boys, which is about the Replacements, and it sort of clicked, okay, like now he was this kind of Paul Westerberg type. As for sort of picturing him, I'm a big fan of The Shield, and always like imagined, like as I was writing him, his voice and kind of his look was always inspired by Jay Carnes, who I I adore as an actor and as a person. He's a good friend. And I was so happy when he said yes to doing the audiobook. So he's actually the person that Martin is sort of physically based on is actually going to be reading for him, which
Oh,
is
wow.
really, really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And Valerie definitely went through several evolutions. Usually when I start writing female characters, and I did this with Jet Bennett in The Big Rewind too, they're much more crass. They're much edgier. They're much more vulgar. And then the edges kind of get sanded down a little bit. And they eventually sort of become the character that I need them to be. Like they sort of start as Tank Girl and then just again sort of smooth out.
Okay.
They're still, edgy, and they're still, again, Valerie's a boxer. She's probably the toughest character I've ever created, but she's a lot less crass. She's more genuinely human than sort of like you get those kind of tropes of like women written by men who are like that, what Gillian Flynn calls, what was it? Oh God, now I can't even remember what she calls it, but she talks about it in Gone Girl, like the girl who keeps her figure while like gangbanging hot dogs and all that.
Yeah.
So, she's not that crass anymore.
Okay. Gonna need a moment to recover from that description.
Sorry, hey, it was Gillian Flynn.
I'm just, actually, I follow a creator on TikTok who loves to read sections of books that are written by men and how they write women, and it's hilariously awful.
Oh my God, yeah.
So, so in terms of the music,
Yes.
there's lots and lots of references to music in this book. You clearly love music. That comes through.
You can see my records back here. You can see back
Yes.
here. My record player is directly behind me.
Yes. So is all the music in the book your taste, or did you kind of branch out for the characters and learn about some new musical groups, or how did that work?
Martin's tastes are actually the closest to my taste.
Okay.
And his was really easy. Again, Jay and I had talked a lot about music, and so some of those conversations ended up, there's definitely, like, he talks about listening to the Replacements, and they're a major band of mine. I actually got the shirt on today.
Nice.
And Warren Zevon. This one doesn't go as hard on making fun of Billy Joel, which The Big Rewind did. Although I think he's mentioned in one of the stories. Valerie's tastes were a little harder because I wanted to make something that felt accurate to a 30-year-old. But when I was 30, I was listening to the Replacements and Steely Dan and Warren Zevon and the Vapors. And so I had to tread kind of, I had to really think about hers, and I don't think I nailed it. I think in later iterations, she's going to be a little bit more of an old school millennial hipster, so more Franz Ferdinand and the Killers and things like that. Yeah. So I'm not sure I fully nailed her music taste, but that's kind of the fun thing about writing series characters, is you can always refine them slightly.
Right. Well, you can always blame it on the fact that her aunt raised her after her parents died and has kind of some similar tastes to Martin, so she has those influences, and
and I was definitely influenced by my older sister, so and my parents. So
right.
I was sort of listening to Warren Zevon, but also the Wallflowers, and then developing my own music tastes, and
right.
So it's Valerie's a little bit more of an evolution. I think Martin is pretty set in what he listens to.
Yeah, which also makes sense generationally for them.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting question about who influences our musical tastes, right? As Libby was talking about that, I know that wasn't the gist of the conversation, but it got me to thinking. Libby mentioned siblings, parents, and that's definitely a lot of mine. My siblings are 4 and 6.5 years older than I, and definitely influenced my musical tastes. My dad had a big effect on my musical tastes. I think I've told the story where we had an entertainment center that had a reel-to-reel and 8-track vinyl, all kinds of different types of ways to listen to music, and so I grew up listening to lots of my dad's music. And then the fact that I grew up in rural western Montana and we really only had one radio station that came in, and that was a little iffy, made a difference. Also, I didn't have cable growing up, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to MTV unless I was at my friends. So definitely siblings had a big influence, although I did like a lot of the popular music of my generation. But I do remember when I got my first record, or my first tape player. It was a tape player when I was a kid. I got it for Christmas, and it was little. It was about this big and lavender. And I had some Christmas money, so I got to go choose my first single. Do you remember singles? They were singles, but they were cassettes, so they were singles. Probably where I got my love of word mashups. And for the life, my brain went blank. We went to the music store and I couldn't think of a single band or song that I wanted to get a single for. I did finally make a choice. Didn't like it. Almost never listened to that single. But then I got Wanna Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston, and then I was much, much happier, and I sang that badly at the top of my lungs. And this is a tangent, so I'm going to go ahead and take our next break. When we come back, we will be talking about, besides music, some of the other types of research that Libby did for the novel and the series. You are tuned into the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Libby Cudmore. Before the break, we were talking about main character Martin and Valerie and their taste in music and putting together those tastes in music, kind of figuring those out. And then I went off on a bit of my own tangent about musical influences, the influences of our musical taste. Let's go ahead and return now to segment 3 of the interview with Libby. Besides music, were there any particular types of research that you needed to do for the story?
Not so much research. I definitely went down the hole of again, music biographies and sort of getting a sense of what it was like to be a musician in the late 80s, early 90s. And so things like Trouble Boys were a big help. And then just keeping up on reading other mysteries to sort of keep that influence going in between drafts. But when I'm reading or when I'm writing mysteries, I tend to read more nonfiction just because I don't want any real influence. I don't want anybody else's voice kind of coming in.
Yeah.
But I had to be very careful, almost anti-influence, because I get really excited about something and kind of put it more into the story where it might not have made sense. And that was really more of the short stories. But there was a full draft that might be used later, an earlier draft that followed them looking for a missing guitar that belonged to a Kurt Cobain type. And so I got down a rabbit hole of looking about lost instruments.
That would be fascinating, but yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
And I wish I like I said, I may pull that one out at another time, but I did go down a research wormhole, but not for this book.
But that's the nice thing about a series is you may have room for that story later.
Yeah.
In terms of the series, do you have an arc for how long you would like the series to go, or is you just going to keep writing while you have the opportunity and the ideas?
I'd like to see it go as long as I enjoy writing it. So probably no more than 6 books. There is an arc for this set, sort of the Cecilia arc. So I'm hoping for 3. With a collection of the short stories, because I would like them all together to sort of show the progression of the characters. But yeah, right now it's kind of at 3. But, again, I've got all these ideas for other ones. I've always thought it would be fun to use Philip from The Big Rewind, who is implied to have been Martin's partner when he worked in New York City. So kind of linking those two. But that's more of an Easter egg for fans of The Big Rewind to see that, oh yeah, he was Philip's partner.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about a little bit more about The Big Rewind? Maybe, give an overview so people know what that story's about as well?
Yeah, so The Big Rewind was my first novel back in 2016, and it follows Jet Bennett, who's a music journalist who finds a mixtape that is for her downstairs neighbor. Well, she goes to return the tape. Her neighbor Kit Kat is dead, and she uses the tape to solve Kit Kat's mystery. So it was a very kind of 2010s kind of hipster storyline. Okay. So it's a much more fun novel than this one. This one is much more serious, but The Big Rewind was very fun, and it was in what they called new adult, which is a genre that never quite took off. But I did enjoy writing it. And actually, Martin and Valerie were sort of spin-off characters. They were the client in a proposed sequel. And the sequel didn't get picked up. But I always sort of liked the interaction of them. And they were a father-daughter pair originally.
Okay.
But I sort of broke them out because I'd been wanting to write a more traditional PI novel. That's what I came up in the genre with. And so I was like, well, what if we just made them a pair? And that's kind of what started it. That, again, going back to that F.A. Perrine PI idea.
Yeah. And then any other writings, anything else that you want to highlight since I have you?
So, well, I've actually been delving a little bit into horror, which is really exciting. I've had a piece published in The Dark. I had one in Bleed Error. So starting to edge into, again, not gory, no ick factor, but just stuff that's unsettling. And I can't tell you why I'm writing that.
Okay.
It just sort of came unexpectedly that I think I started having a lot of nightmares. And so I was like, well, why don't I translate these stories about, bath beads and giant jellyfish that control a town? Like, why don't I just put those on paper? So,
interesting. Yeah. So is that that's what you're currently working on?
A little bit. Starting to tinker with a possible second Martin and Valerie book. So fingers crossed. I don't get a second book unless y'all race out and buy Negative Girl, either on audiobook or in paperback. So hopefully I've got that. And then, always just a couple other suspense and thriller and weird ideas kicking around.
Yeah. Is the audiobook out already, or is it in production?
The audiobook will come out September 10th.
Okay. Oh, good. So we can promote that September 10th. Go pre-order Negative Girl. If that is your preferred method of reading, which is perfectly valid. I love audiobooks.
Yeah. And again, the audiobook, I'm reading for Valerie. Jake Harns is reading for Martin. And I have to give a shout out to him because he's so good. Like when I first heard him read, and again, like I've always admired his work and always valued his friendship. But when I heard him read, I started to cry. I actually called up the friend that I did the Shield podcast with and was just sobbing hysterically. It's so good. So I really have to put that out there. I think I do pretty good as Valerie, but really that's our Martin is incredible.
Well, I mean that's pretty cool that you got somebody that great. How
He's
often does that happen?
Great.
Yeah.
I know. I couldn't believe when he said yes. It was almost like a marriage proposal. Like I came downstairs with my husband. I'm like, he said yes. So
I love it. In terms of writing, so you've done some journalism, you've obviously written in various capacities, but in terms of writing for publication, is it something you always wanted to do? Did you come to that decision kind of later in life? What was that path for you?
Okay, so I love this story. My dad is a published writer. He's like local history, and my mom is always like a very vivid storyteller, and used to do like storytelling workshops and come to my class and things like that. But in 5th grade, I had a dream that I had written a book, and that was it. I was like, this is what I want to do. So there was never, it was either that or I did want to go into theater. I used to do musical theater. And I said, okay, well, when I was looking at colleges, it's like go to school for English and creative writing or go to school for theater. And my mom was like, you are not going to theater school. I'm not paying for theater school, which somehow like creative writing, I think she was always like, well, you could teach. So, sure. And I did, and I do. I teach with the Writers Circle in Summit, New Jersey. And she was right. And, I probably, as a drama kid does, like threw myself across the bed. Like nobody understands me, but I mean, my parents, they were right. My mom's always right about that stuff. So, but I did major in creative writing, possibly out of spite.
Yeah.
And I got my MFA in creative writing. So
it's not visual, but you get to do the audiobook. So that's,
absolutely. And I can always act in regional theater. If I felt like it.
Sure. Right. From your own experience, what piece of advice would you give to an aspiring author?
I mean, there's the typical, write, I don't want to say every day, but write as a routine. Some people don't write every day, but you need to like get in that routine. But I'm going to say, make friends with writers. Don't network necessarily with writers, but make genuine friends and cheer other writers on and be part of the writing community, because there is always a sense among, I don't want to say lesser writers, but let's just say some writers, that there's only room for one. It's kind of Highlander, like if you publish a book, then I can't. And that's not it. You know, publishing and being in a writing community opens opportunities. It's also really, it's much more fun to cheer for your writer friends than it is to pout when they get something that you like think you deserve. And so it's so fun to be part of a community and to be present with other writers. So really just make writer friends. Yeah. And I'm in a Discord with a bunch of really, really, really great writers. And a bunch of them are nominated for Anthony Awards. And I cannot wait to cheer them on.
Yeah.
And I hope they feel the same. I'm up for a Seamus for another Martin and Valerie story, Beyond Belief, which isn't tough, which is online. You can read that one online. Okay. And I hope they feel the same about me.
Sure.
A rising,
congratulations.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. A rising tide raises all ships. So get really excited for your writer friends.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so, I mean, yes, you might write in similar genres, but there's so many. I love publishing right now because there's so many niches in each genre. Like, I know. And there's so many cross genres. Like, publicists are going to have a hard time even labeling books, which I'm okay with because, you know, there's too few boxes. So,
but yeah, some of my friends are doing just the most incredible work and really challenging, and also having writer friends that don't write the same thing as you. I always shout out James Tad Adcox, who I know through the Barrel House Writer Camp, which is where the Martin and Valerie stories sort of originated in their earliest forms. And he writes this incredible flash fiction. And it's not something I write, but it's so challenging every time I read it. And it makes me think about other ways to write. So, you know, read widely, read completely outside of your genre, especially when you are writing, because it will challenge you to think of new ways to construct sentences and new ways to think about stuff. I don't know if Negative Girl would exist without Trouble Boys, without some of these other memoirs. I look up on my shelf and I've got, you know, Eminent Hipsters by Donald Fagen. I've got books on the Smiths and Elvis Costello. And there's a book, Hell of a Hat, which is about the rise of swing and ska, and that inspired a Martin and Valerie story called Dr. Bones that's coming out sometime next year. So just read so widely because you'll get inspiration from that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I love this piece of advice about making friends, making author friends so much because, I mean, not only is it good to have support systems and people around you who are helpful and you can support one another, but also what Libby was saying about reading things that you never know what's going to inspire you, and you never know what piece of work is going to inspire you. And it may be something that you never would have read if you weren't friends with a particular author, or you never would have read if you weren't hosting a podcast about a book review podcast. I've said maybe not quite 1,000,000 times, but a lot. I have read so many books for this podcast that I never would have read otherwise. And that is truly a gift. And hopefully it has inspired me to read more broadly and to read outside of my comfort zone and do all of those wonderful things. So we are going to go ahead and take our final break of this episode. When we come back, we'll be talking about what Libby reads when she is reading just for her. So you are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Libby Cudmore. Before the break, Libby was giving her advice for aspiring authors, talking about making author friends, reading widely, finding inspiration in possibly unexpected places. Let's go ahead now and return to the conclusion of my conversation with Libby. You have mentioned a few different books that you've read and talking about reading widely, but when you are reading just for you, what are your go-to authors and genres?
Oh God, it really varies. I'm a big fan of going to some place like the Strand, like a used bookstore, and being like, "Ooh, that looks good." So it's really, really random. And it's great because I have so many writer friends, so I get different people's books. Like I'm reading Tessa Yang's The Runaway Restaurant, which is short fiction. Right now, my current read is a book on the history of striptease and burlesque.
Interesting.
So, yeah. I've been reading a lot more nonfiction lately.
Mhm.
And that's not for any particular reason. I could also give a shout out. The next book on my list is my dad's book, which is The Cave Electrician's Widow, which is about the only 2 deaths to ever happen in Howe Caverns.
And your dad's name so that people can look
Oh,
up.
sorry, that's Dana Cudmore.
Okay,
Give him
perfect.
a
Thank
shout
you.
out. So yeah, lately, niche nonfiction, I guess, is where I'm leaning in. But
So when
my friend Renee Nicholson just put out a poetry book, so I'll be reading that.
Wonderful, love it. When you go to a used bookstore, do you just wander until a cover catches your eye? Or do you like just wait until something draws? Like how do you search for books in a bookstore?
I start in mystery and sort of look in there and look for familiar names. I look for my friends' names, so I'll be like, oh, there's S.A. Cosby's book. Oh, there's Tony Wirt's book. And grab any that I might not have. Then I head over to like film and find any, like lately I've been really looking for biographies of pinups. So I have Dita Von Teese's 2 books. I picked up like a little like Life According to Betty, Betty Page book. She's my icon. And then it's weird because I always look in drama. Like I'll look for different plays, which I guess is like the theater kid still in me. Hedda Gabler was a huge influence on me as a person. And so I'm always looking, like I'll just read Henrik Ibsen plays like for fun.
All right.
So, or like Eric Bogosian monologues. John Leguizamo's Mambo Mouth was one I read over the pandemic. So just kind of wandering. I'll look in fashion and
Yeah. And seeing your own books in the wild, so to speak, how is that something that you seek out, or do you kind of let it surprise you?
I let it surprise me. One of my friends messaged me one time. She was headed to Australia for a conference, and she's like, "Yo, I'm in LAX, and I just saw your book."
That's awesome.
And that was the big rewind, and it was just like, "Oh, I'm in the airport." It doesn't get any better than that. Like once you're in the airport, that's like, for me, that's like the peak.
Yeah, no, I get that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is weird because I don't usually read on flights because it gives me a headache. Like I'm a much more like I listen to soft jazz or watch a movie. Which is too, I wish I could read on flights. I can't read in the car. I can't read on flights. So.
Yeah. I'm very sorry.
I know. It's like, it's a real drag. Because it's weird. I could read on the train though. And I was actually just rereading Mike Nelson's Death Rat.
Interesting. You can read on a train, but not a car or a plane.
I can't explain it.
I don't know. That just sounded like a children's book that I made up in my head. You can read on a train, but not a car or a plane. In terms of internet, if people want to know more about you and the books, you have a website. So share the website and any social media you're active on.
It is libbycudmore.com. You can find me mostly on Instagram these days, where you can find pictures of the records I'm listening to, pictures of my cats, or pictures of rockabilly fashion that I am wearing at the moment. You can also find me on Blue Sky, which I migrated over from Twitter. It's just Libby Cudmore, and also still holding down the fort on Twitter at Libby Cudmore. Sorry, the Instagram is at record_Saturday. I do 2 podcasts currently. I'm on the OST Party podcast, which is movie soundtrack podcast. And we're gearing up for season 4 of Misbehavin', which is the Righteous Gemstones podcast. But I also did the Shattered Shield podcast. So if you are watching The Shield for the first time or rewatching it, you can find all 88 episodes of that. Actually, I think there's more because we do recaps. But that's the Shattered Shield podcast. I joined in season 2.
And I would imagine you probably can find all of this information on your website, yeah?
Yes, that is all linked from LibbyCudmore.
Okay. Perfect. Libby, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to make sure you highlight?
I don't think so. This is so fun.
Well, thank you
thank you.
I mean, thank you for taking time out of your weekend to talk to me. Not only about the book but writing. I really, really appreciate it.
No, I love it. I love talking about writing, and I love helping other writers. So you're always welcome to email me from my website, because I love engaging with other writers. I love teaching other writers. I love learning from other writers. So I will also be at VoucherCon at the end of August. So come find me there. I have Negative Girl stickers. It's great.
Again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. No, this is so fun.
Thank you once again to Libby for joining me for this conversation. I had so much fun talking to her. You can tell that she is passionate about music, about these characters, about writing, and it was so much fun. I wish that the recording hadn't cut off the other side of her screen where you could see her bookshelf, because there was so much. You just want to kind of go wander through the space and explore everything that she had going on behind her. But Libby, thank you again for joining me. If you are a fan of crime fiction, if you are a fan of very low eek and ick suspense or thriller, not even maybe, but definitely a good mystery, fast-paced, character-driven mystery, if you are looking maybe for a new series. And this one is the first in this series, but you also have some of those short stories, and you can go to Libby's website and learn more about where to find those other short stories. So that is always a good thing. Then this is definitely something that you want to check out, because you know that more are coming. I mean, I'm a fan of series that you can read all at once, but I'm also a fan of finding new series that I didn't know about before and that I can jump into and be excited about. So definitely check that out. I hope that you will join me for my next episode. I will be speaking with Nicole Lundgren about her book, A Man Downstairs. We are still in the thriller suspense category. This is a book of definite example of when your past, or when the past comes back to haunt you, although it might not be the character whose past you are expecting to be haunted by the past. This is from the acclaimed author of An Unthinkable Thing and Hideaway. It's described as a breath-stopping novel of suspense about a woman tormented by memories of the past and threatened by long-held secrets in the present. So there's family dynamics, there's intrigue, there's the past coming back, as I said. So please join me for that episode. In the meantime, if you are a fan of this podcast, please do like, follow, subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to it or watching it on. That is a great help. Also, please leave a positive review. You have no idea how helpful that is to the podcast and to the network as a whole. Really does help us out. So thank you in advance and in retrospect for all of the support you have either already given or will give in the future. It's so very, very, very much appreciated. If you are on social media and would like to follow the podcast, you can do so on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok. Love hearing from you, so go find the podcast on social media, follow it, comment, let me know what you're reading. Talk to me about who influenced your musical tastes. What was the very first thing you bought when you got your first music player of whatever variety that was? There's been so many iterations of music players. So yeah, just come answer all my nosy questions. You know I love it. I hope you're having a great week. I hope that you are staying cool wherever you are. But most of all, I hope that whatever you are doing, you have plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to